Hello students and welcome back to the video lecture series of software engineering. Today's topic is risk management. I am your instructor Ms. Shruti Rawal. So let us study what do you mean by risk and what are the ways in which we can manage the risk. The first thing that we need to study is there is no proper definition of risk, but we can identify risk by its characteristic. There are two basic characteristics which are related to risk. The first one is loss. It means if risk becomes a reality, then there will be for sure unwanted consequences or loss. Okay, so risk is something that is uncertain. So the next characteristic which is related to risk is uncertainty. It means it may happen or it may not happen, right? So risk is nothing but it is an event which if occurs, then it is for sure that there will be some consequences and not the good ones, it will be bad consequences, and there is an uncertainty related to risk, right? So there is a probability that whether the risk may occur or not. So these are the two basic characteristics of risk, and there are a number of risks which are related to your project, that is software project. Now let us study what are the different categories of risk. So the first category of risk is project risk. Now what do you mean by project risk? The risk associated with the overall project is known as project risk, such as the project schedule, the project budget, right, the project, or you can say the stakeholder characteristic, etc. So when the project risk becomes real, what will happen? Yes, for sure there is almost a possibility that your project may fail. So it is very necessary to handle the project related risk at highest priority. Okay, the next risk or the next category of risk is technical risk. Now if the technical risk become real, it is a possibility that your project may be a success, but the quality may be compromised, right? What do you mean by technical risk? Technical risk is related to all the technicalities related to your project, starting from the technical skills of your developers to the experience that is related to the developers. Also it is related to the technology, that is whether you are working with the new technology, old technology, right? Also it is related with the technical resources that you are providing. Okay, development environment, these all risk comes under the category of technical risk, and it is a possibility that you may complete the project successfully even with the technical risk becoming the reality, but for sure if they become real, the quality of your project can be compromised. So it is also necessary to bifurcate what are the technical risks which are probable in your project, also to prioritize which technical risks to be handled and which are not to be handled, right? The next or the last category of risk is business risk. Now business risk is a broad term. We have divided business risk into different further categories. The first being market risk. What do you mean by market risk? Market risk, it means you are creating a very good product which is not required in the market, right? So it means that there is no need for creating this product. There is no problem for which we are developing a solution. That is known as a market risk, and if you develop such a product which is not required in the market or which is no longer required, it is a possibility that when you have started this product, there was a market need that you had identified, but during the course of development, the technology is changing, the market is changing, and at the end of the product deployment, there is no need of this product. That sort of risk is known as market risk. The next category of risk is strategic risk. Now strategic risk is related to the business strategy that your company is following. Every company has its own business strategy that the company follows, right? Now if there is some problem in the business strategy, it will affect the whole project, and that is also a risk, right? The next is sales risk. Now what do you mean by sales risk? You are developing a good product which is required in the market, but the salesperson in your company do not know how to sell that product, right? So that is also a risk, because if we have something but we don't know how to sell it, then also it is useless. So that is the sales risk. The next risk is budget risk. So if you are losing the overall budget, if you have a sponsorship, if you are losing the sponsorship, or you may have dedicated budget but you are losing the track of that dedicated budget, or you are going over budget, right? So these sort of risks which are related to monetary decisions of your company are known as budget risk. Okay, also there may be management risk. Management risk is a different kind of business risk which is related to the managerial people associated with your company. If they do not have the vision to develop a good quality project, that also may affect the business of your software product, right? So these all are the different categories of risk. Now risk is not related to only this category. There is a whole another category of risk that we have defined. The first category is known risk. Now what do you mean by known risk? Known risk are such risks that after carefully analyzing the product that we are going to develop, we can encounter some of the risk in our project which may be probable to occur, right? For example, you know that the people in your software currently are not technically skilled, right? So you know that they may fail to develop a quality product because the code may be not optimized, right? The algorithm that they are using may not be a higher quality algorithm, right? So these all are the risks which are known risk, which can carefully be analyzed, and you can again consider them according to the probability which the risk is going to occur and the priority in which you are going to handle the known risk. The next risk is predictable risk. Now these are the similar words, known and predictable, but what is the difference? Known risk is solely related to this project and not related to any past project, whereas predictable risk are risk which you are actually analyzing or getting an idea from the similar past project that you have done, right? For example, your company is a whole Java based company and currently you are taking .NET related project, right? You do not have that staff which is very well accustomed with the .NET technology. You may have worked on .NET related project and you may have encountered some of the risk associated with that technology. Now again, if you are having a project which is of the same technology, that .NET technology, then you can predict the risk because you have already worked on similar type of project in past. You have encountered the risk, you have managed the risk, you can predict the risk from past experience. This risk is known as predictable risk, right? So from past experience, whatever risk you are encountering or analyzing, that comes under the category of predictable risk. And the last is unpredictable risk. So as the name suggests, these are the type of risks which are very dangerous. You cannot predict this risk well in advance. You only have to handle it with the reactive strategy. You cannot apply proactive strategy in unpredictable risk, right? What do you mean by proactive and reactive strategy? Proactive strategy, it means you know these are the risks that may occur. You are doing something about that. You are managing the risk. You are trying to mitigate the risk. That is known as proactive strategy. Whereas reactive strategy is sitting idle and waiting for the risk to actually occur and then handling the risk, right? So the known risk as well as the predictable risk can be handled with the proactive strategy, whereas the unpredictable risk, because they are unpredictable, you have to sit idle until they occur, right? So this can only be handled with the reactive strategy. So these were the two different genres and categories of risk that we have studied. Now let us move further. The first thing, if you want to manage the risk, is you have to identify the risk, right? So the next topic that we are going to study is risk identification. There are basic two categories of risk while identifying the risk in any software. The first category is generic risk. Now generic risk are the type of risk which are occurring commonly in all the different software projects, right? So you can also have this category of risk to be analyzed for your particular software. There is a product specific risk which is different for every software product. Now generic risk, you have already a list of generic risk in the software industry. You can analyze whether that is going to occur in your project or not, right? But what are the risks that actually needs to be identified? Yes, exactly. The product specific risk associated to this particular product are to be identified, and for the identification of that product specific risk, you are developing RIC, that is also known as risk item checklist. That is nothing but that is a different genre or different categories of risk, for example in the estimation, in the schedule, etc., which types of risk may occur in this product, right? So let us see what are the different categories. In the risk item checklist, the first one is all the risk associated with product size, right? So what is the actual scope of your product? What is the length of your product in which you are going to develop, right? So that are the risk associated with product size. It is a possibility that customer's requirement is never ending, right? So what will happen? Ultimately the size of product will increase and increase and increase. But there should be a limit to the product size, and if there is no limit, then there may be a risk associated with product size. So you need to be clear in communicating with the customer that this is the product size that we are going to work upon. You have to manage all your requirements inside this size, right? So you have to be clear about the product scope. If you are not clear, about the boundaries of what to include and what not to include, then you may have product size risk in your project. The next is business impact. Now again we have already studied what are the different business related risk, right? So if any of that categories of risk comes to real in your product, then that is a business impact risk. Okay. The next is stakeholders characteristic. We are talking mostly about the customer and developers characteristic and the communication that takes place while requirement gathering. Okay, because we know that majority of the mishaps in software industry are due to the customer's miscommunication with the developer, right? So we need to take into consideration that stakeholders characteristics while developing the risk item checklist, whether the communication is going smoothly or are there any chances of miscommunicating or not, right? So that is one of the category. The next is process definition. We have already studied what is a process model, right? So it is a possibility that we may have chosen wrong process model, and also it is a possibility that we may have chosen the right definition for process model, but we are not actually following that process model, right? To choose a process model and to follow a process model, that are altogether very different things, right? So even though you know what process model you have to use, are you actually using that process model? Right. So if there is a risk associated with process model, then you can keep that risk under this category. The next risk is risk associated with development environment. All the building tools that you are using, all the technology that you are using, all the risk associated with the development environment comes under this category. The next is technology to be built. Also we know that normally the technology in software industry changes, right? So is there any risk associated with this technology? Will this technology become obsolete, or is it going to sustain in near future? Okay, so that is a risk associated with technology. For example, you know that in olden days we were using Java enabled phones, but currently Android and iPhone have taken over the market. So the Java enabled phones are becoming obsolete, and there is no use of that phones, right? So at that time when they were building, they were not having that vision, right? But in the current scenario, sustainability is very important to think, and whatever technology you are using, you have to analyze the risk associated with that technology, right? The next is staff size and experience. Both of them are important. If you have experienced staff but you don't have the staff size, if you don't have enough developers, then you cannot work on many projects simultaneously, right? Because you need resources for different projects, and if you don't have enough resource, then also there is a problem. Also, on the other hand, if you have many developers which do not have experience, then that also is a problem, because every project requires a fair amount of experienced resources, that is human resource. So if there is any risk which is associated with the staff size and experience for your particular project, you may put that in this category. Okay, so I hope this is clear. What do you mean by risk item checklist? You have to first analyze your project. you have to take every category of this project and you have to see whether these categories related risk are probable in your project or not. If yes, in the checklist you can put correct. If not, in the checklist you can put a cross mark, right? That is how the checklist works. The next is risk projection. Now what do you mean by risk projection? Risk projection is also known as risk estimation, and it attempts to rate the risk. Okay, so we have already done the risk item checklist, so we know what are the risks associated with our project. Now it is the turn to rate every risk, right? How are we going to rate the risk? Based on probability of risk being real. We are trying to give probability related to every risk, right? That what is the probability that this risk will become real? If there is a higher probability, you may say that 90% of the probability for this risk being real, right? If there is a less probability, you can give 20%. So it is upon you. This probability giving, it comes from the experience, right? So a novice developer, which is a fresher, cannot give this probability to risk. Risk management is not everyone's cup of tea. It is only after a careful analysis, and this only can be done by experienced developers. Okay, so probability is again an estimation. It is a rough estimation which the experienced developer give to each of the category of the risk associated with your project. The next thing that we do in risk projection or risk estimation is we actually write down the consequences of problems associated if the risk becomes real, because we know that there is a probability that this risk may become real, right? For example, if there is a risk, there is a risk associated with staff experience. I have given the probability 60% probability for the risk to become real. Now there will be some consequences which is related to that particular risk, right? So if you do not have staff experience, what are the consequences? By default, the quality of the code will compromise. The schedule may suffer because the developers are fresher. They will not cope up with the tight schedule, right? So these all are the consequences or the problems that you may have to face if the risk become real. So in risk projection, what you need to do, the first thing is rating the risk. The next thing is you have to list down the consequences related to every risk if they become real. Now let us study the steps of the risk projection. The first one is, again, you have to establish scale of likelihood of risk. That is, you have to give the probability. The next is delineate the consequences. That is, listing out the consequences of every risk if they become real. The next is you have to estimate the impact on project and product. There may be consequences. There is a probability that the risk may become real, but if the risk become real, what is the actual impact on project and product? There are some risks which do not have a very high impact. It means even if they become real, there is no major consequences in the project or product development, and it is okay if they become real. But there are some risks that if they become real, your whole project success may depend on that risk to become real or not, right? So you have to actually estimate the impact of every risk that you have identified. And the last is you have to assess the accuracy of the projection. We have done this estimation, but how much accurate is this estimation? You have to assess the accuracy of this projection so that we do not get stuck in middle of the project development, right? Now in risk projection, the good thing to do is you have to develop a risk table. So this is a basic table view in which you can see what are the risks associated with your project. You can see what is the probability, what is the impact. So if you have a table view, that will be a better view to project or estimate the risk, right? So what is a risk table? Risk table is actually a table which is done based on risk item checklist. Okay, after filling the table with the risk, you have to sort it by probability and impact. right? So you will have the categories of risk, you will have the probability, you will have the impact. You have to sort it. How you are sorting it? High probability, high risk is in the topmost rows of the table. Low probability, low impact is on the downward side, right? After sorting it by probability and impact, what are you going to do? You are deciding a cutoff line. So in between, you are deciding a cutoff line, and this cutoff line decides that all the risk above this cutoff line are actually to be mitigated and handled, and all the cutoff line, all the risk associated below this cutoff line are not to be handled. Okay, so the cutoff line above risk are to be handled proactively, whereas all the risk associated below cutoff line are to be handled reactively. That is what we will do in risk table. So let us see an example of risk table. This is just an example of risk table. Here you can see if I have a particular project, I may have categorized the risk, right? So this is the description on the left hand side, that what are the risks which I have identified through risk item checklist. So this is the category of risk item checklist. We have already studied what are the different category, right? Project size or business impact. I have written the short form. PS stands for project size, right? BS stands for business impact, etc. So I have first written the category, that is the descriptive risk, then the category in which it is associated in risk item checklist, then the probability that the experienced developer has given, that is the likelihood of occurring of that particular risk has been delineated, and the impact. Now in this impact, 1 stands for catastrophic. It means if this risk has an impact 1, and if that risk occurs, it means it will have a highest impact on the project. It is possible that your project may be a failure, right? So the 1 stands for catastrophic, 2 stands for critical, 3 stands for marginal, and 4 stands for negligible. So these are the severity of impact of that risk on your product and process, right? So now what we will do, we have already studied what are these columns. The next thing is, yes, you have to develop a cutoff line, right? So here you can see I have developed a cutoff line. All the risk above cutoff line are to be handled proactively. All the risk below the cutoff line, we are assuming that they are low probability and low impact, so they will be handled reactively. It means if they occur, we will see what we will do, right? The next topic after risk estimation is RMMM. Now what does RMMM stands for? The first M stands for mitigation, that is avoidance. The second M stands for monitoring or tracking, and the last M stands for management. Now let us study what is risk mitigation, risk monitoring, and risk management. The first thing that we are going to study is risk mitigation. Now what is risk mitigation? Risk mitigation is basically a proactive approach to avoid the risk. So the first step that we will take in risk management is we will make sure that the risk does not occur at all, right? So we will take the step to avoid the risk, right? So that is, let us take an example of staff turnover. What do you mean by high staff turnover? It means that all the employees or majority of the employees in your company are leaving your company. That is one of the risk associated with your company, high staff turnover, right? So we will take this example and we will try to learn what do you mean by risk mitigation, risk monitoring, and risk management, right? So what are the steps for mitigating high staff turnover? What we will do to avoid this? The first thing is we will have backup staff assigned for critical technology. We know that there are different projects in our company, and we will see what is the critical technology on which the persons are working. We will assign a backup staff for that particular technology. The next is we will conduct peer reviews. Okay, so we will check on every project now and then. We will conduct reviews. What is the status? What is the status of project? What is the status of people associated with that project? The next is we will define the standards and mechanism to ensure timely development, because we know that there is a probability that there will be high staff turnover, and if the employees are anyways going to leave your company, they will be lethargic. They will not actually perform everything on time because they will take everything for granted, right? But we will actually develop a standard mechanism in which we make sure that the development is done timely, right? The next thing that we will do is we will develop the techniques to ensure continuity when people leave, right? So we need to mitigate the risk, but still we will develop the technique to ensure continuity while people are leaving. Also, we will meet the staff to determine what is the cause of turnover. Now, it is not the thing that happens overnight, right? So, every employee or majority of the employee of your company, if they are planning to leave your company, there must be a very good reason with them, right? So, is this money or the atmosphere in which they are working, or anything related with motivation, appreciation, or new opportunities in your company, or the actual team structure which we are following, or there are personal grudges, whatever, right? So there may be number of reasons, there may be myriad people in your company having different reasons for leaving the company. You will meet them individually, you will try to convince them, because some person may be looking for higher money, and some person, even though you offer them money, they may be looking for a better project. So you may offer them some of the things that they want, right? So that is one of the strategy that you may follow for avoiding this risk altogether. Now, the next thing after risk mitigation is risk monitoring. Now we know that even though we have tried everything for avoiding the risk, there may be some person who will not be convinced and leave the company, right? So we have to be prepared for the risk to occur, and for that we have to monitor all the things that we have already applied, right? So basically we have to track the project, and this is a basic role of project manager, in which he or she ensures or monitors all the factors indicating risk and effectiveness of mitigation. Now we have already prepared for the backup staff for critical technologies. You have to assess the general attitude of the team members. You have to also see that whether the team members are gelling with each other or they are having the fights or what, right? You have to check the interpersonal relationship. You have to try again for the compensation and benefits. You have to see what are the job availabilities in the market. You have to also conduct interviews so that you hire some of the staff, right? Also, if you are hiring some of the new staff, you have to impart information for the newcomers who are joining. Okay, also along with all of this, you have to check for the continuity of project when a critical member is actually leaving, right? So the last part comes risk management. It means we have tried everything for risk mitigation. We have already monitored the risk, if it is becoming real or not. Now risk management will come into picture when your majority of staff is leaving the company. That is, your risk actually becomes real, right? So the first two portion were before the risk becoming real, and the risk management is when the risk becomes real, right? So what will we do if the risk is becoming real? We know that mitigation has failed and the risk has become a reality. Now we have to readjust all our project schedule and resources. But what is the good thing? We have hired the new staff, we have imparted the knowledge in the new staff, we already have started the knowledge transfer mode. We are stopping the work, we are transferring the knowledge from old people because they are on the notice period. So we are telling them stop the work and transfer all your knowledge to the newcomers. Already the backup staff which were on bench has been assigned to the critical technologies. They are also now well aware about what is going on in the project, right? So what will happen, even though your risk has become a reality, it is a possibility that majority of your project may not suffer, right? So this was all about risk mitigation, monitoring and management. And this was all about today's lecture. Thank you.